America is a Gun by Brian Bilston. England is a cup of tea, France a wheel of ripened brie, Greece a short squat olive tree. America is a gun. Brazil is football on the sand, Argentina Maradona's hand, Germany an oompa band. America is a gun. Holland is a wooden shoe, Hungary a goulash stew, Australia a kangaroo. America is a gun. Japan is a thermal spring, Scotland is a highland fling. Oh, better to be anything than America as a gun. This poem was written a few years ago in response to seeing another familiar image, another horrific reminder of the reality that awaits us beyond our front door, a reality that is unique to America among developed nations. Mass shootings. Now, when I say mass shootings, the most high-profile ones come to our minds right away. The Pulse nightclub in Orlando, where 49 people lost their lives and 58 were injured. The concert in Las Vegas, where 59 people were killed and 500 were injured. The Sandy Hook Elementary School in Newtown, Connecticut, where 20 children and 6 staff were killed. San Bernardino, where 14 were killed, 22 were injured. Sutherland Springs, Texas, 26 killed. Parkland, Florida, Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, 17 killed. These and more have all happened within the last 10 years, with 2017 being the deadliest year on record for gun violence in a decade. America is a gun. As the killings continue, we've learned to follow a disturbing and predictable routine. We grieve and then we move on. We accept the status quo without much of a thought, and then we don't talk about it because we don't know how to talk about it. Today, I want to talk about it. I want to talk about gun violence. As someone who works in education, a site for a lot of mass shootings, as someone who is an uncle to 2 little boys whose future I fear for, and as a younger brother to an avid hunter who I respect and admire and support in his sport, this issue is personal for me, and I feel the need to talk about it. The conversation around guns is as hard as it is necessary. What I want to say before I begin is I don't believe we're as divided as many say. I don't believe the false dichotomy. I believe that we are all concerned about mass violence, and I believe that when we start from there, we can, through hard work, find common ground and common sense solutions. The solution I am proposing today is the banning of assault rifles and the requirement that all who want to own a gun go through a rigorous, mandatory background check. Now, guns come in all shapes and sizes, with different purposes and different capacities. The gun my brother uses, for instance, is a hunting rifle, a weapon created primarily for knocking down deer, shooting pheasant, geese, what have you. In the mass shootings that we've seen over the last several years, the shooters have picked a particular kind of gun, and that is an assault rifle, an assault weapon. In particular, they've chosen the AR-15. A weapon that, according to a Dr. Moore writing for NBC News, can fire 30 or more bullets without reloading. And that, with how high the velocity of these bullets being shot, causes far more extensive damage than that of a handgun or a hunting rifle. Consider the watermelon analogy Dr. Moore uses. A handgun shot to the liver causes a hole of about 1 to 2 inches, whereas a bullet shot from an AR-15 pulverizes it. It's like dropping a watermelon, he says, from the top of a building. The watermelon just splatters. This is the reason why, when you have mass shootings, these shooters use these weapons because they want to kill as many people as possible, and the AR-15 is designed to kill as many people as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. It is designed that way because it is a weapon that was built for the theater of war. Now, when you talk about banning assault weapons, there's an important objection that comes up: the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment protects Americans' right to keep and bear arms, and some would argue that the AR-15 and other assault rifles like it fall under that protection. But it isn't so simple. For starters, the Second Amendment contains a very explicit, well-regulated militia clause, which suggests the right is subject to certain constraints. And indeed, these constraints were affirmed in a Circuit Court Judge Robert King's opinion. Writing for the majority, he says, "Put simply, we have no power to extend Second Amendment protections to weapons of war. He added that the Supreme Court's decision in District of Columbia versus Heller explicitly excluded this coverage. And thank God for that, because in the absence of such constraints, who's to say a bazooka isn't covered by the Second Amendment? Or for that matter, a nuclear bomb? No right can infringe on the rights of others, and if we accept that the Second Amendment inherently prescribes constraints on itself, and that court precedence has affirmed this, and then we look at the evidence of how the AR-15 has taken away the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for so many of its victims, then we can reasonably conclude that this weapon poses a major threat and infringement on the right of fellow citizens. Other folks will say, taking away guns, it isn't going to solve anything. But this too isn't borne out by the evidence. As Vox News reports, in Australia, following a mass shooting in 1996, the government instituted a ban on automatic and semi-automatic assault weapons through a mandatory buyback program. They haven't had a mass shooting since. In fact, in the first 7 years after the ban took effect, homicides dropped by 42%. A second piece of how we go about limiting mass shootings is through instituting mandatory universal background checks. There currently exists what is called a gun show loophole, and what that means is that people can buy guns at gun shows legally without undergoing a background check, whereas at other gun shops, they would. This gun show loophole allows for a flush of dangerous weapons to enter into the populace with little accountability. According to the New York Times, the federal government can't track these guns. So we have no idea of knowing how many are currently in circulations. And the reason why is because the gun lobby has lobbied hard to make sure that these guns can't be tracked. Making background checks mandatory and universal shares broad support amongst non-gun owners and gun owners alike. 89% of Americans, according to a poll by Johns Hopkins University, support this measure. Among those that identified as members of the NRA, 75% support this measure. 75% support mandatory universal background checks. This alone, of course, won't stop gun violence. I believe that people should have the right to protect themselves and their families, and part of this includes allowing people to own handguns, hunting rifles, and other weapons that, while not as menacing as the AR-15 and other assault rifles, can still inflict harm on others. But it's a reasonable, common sense start, and there are ways we can go about achieving it. The biggest blockade to any change whatsoever when it comes to gun laws is the National Rifle Association, one of the largest lobbies in Washington, and one that, while claiming to look out for the rights of their everyday members, is truly out of step with them when it comes to gun policy. Their interests have been revealed to be in bed with the gun manufacturers, whose aim is to sell as many guns as possible. Consequences be damned. As people, we can use our voice and our vote at the ballot box to demand real change to the laws allowing for weapons of war to be unleashed on the streets by anyone who wants them. We can be aware of how much money our elected officials receive from the NRA and call them out on it. So if you care about this issue, speak up on it. Write letters. Make phone calls. Get involved with groups like Moms Demands Action and March for Our Lives. If you care about this, speak up. In the words of Emma Gonzalez, a survivor of the Parkland shooting, fight for your life before it's someone else's job. In order for us to begin fighting for each other's lives, we need to join together to ban assault weapons and make background checks universal and mandatory. We need to come together and have an honest conversation where we let go of the caricatures we hold of the other side and sit with the facts and with each other's humanity. We can do hard things. We can end gun violence.